Students, welcome back to my class. Today we are going to study one famous Indian short story, Rebati, written by Fakir Senapati. Fakir Senapati was an Odia writer who at the same time was a poet, philosopher and social reformer. And he is referred as the Vyasakavi in Odia literature because he translated Mahabharata in Odia language for the first time, and his writing holds the contemporary picture of the Odia society and particularly that of the rural society, and also he represented its historical spirit in his writings. A writer who is unmatched in his prose writings and particularly the stories and in his novels. He used humor in its great variety and as a very potent tool as a writer. And also he represent the reality of the society and interpersonal relationships through rugged, unsentimental tenderness, which makes him endeared to his readers. And his writings in 19th century was responsible for saving Odia literature from the encroachment of neighboring languages in the province. So Rebati is considered as the first story in Odia language, a proper story, and it is the story of a young girl who desired to get education in the so-called conservative or conventional Odia rural society, and for that reason how the protagonist, this 10-year-old girl Rebati, goes through a harrowing suffering, a series of suffering, and ultimately she dies at the end of the story. This is a very tragic story, but at the same time this story brings out the topic of female education and emancipation in a very powerful manner during that period, when in the villages in particular, the contemporary society never allowed the girl child to get educated. And particularly this story is very uh, poignant in the recent development in India, and particularly the slogan that Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao. So, to educate the girl child, and for this reason, Rebati is more significant, that how the same desire to be educated brought a great tragedy, and for which she has been held responsible by the character of her grandmother, who is an old lady who subscribes to the contemporary conservative religious society. So, the story, on one hand, celebrates Fakir zeal, zeal for reformation in the society, and at the other end, it also brings out the very significant human relationship between different characters. Particularly, the story highlights the relationship between the protagonist Rebati, the young girl, and her old grandmother who die simultaneously at the end of the story. And in spite of their conflict of interest, conflict of desires, how they remain inseparable from each other. And another is the relationship between this young, ambitious girl for education with that of the village teacher who is urban and who is educated, and how they also had developed a relationship which, though not approved properly by the society, but how it has bloomed into a relationship of real love. So let us go to the story which is finding itself in the uh, village that is Patapur, which is situated in the Cuttack district of Orissa, is bringing out the story of Rebati, who is the protagonist. And with Rebati, there are another three characters. Her father, Semabandhu Mahanti, who is an agent of the feudal Jamidar who collects tax in the village. And the first part of the story deals with how he manages the family by uh, his own profession as a collector, and how he manages the family of four by doing various other works as well, and developing a garden for his family and all that. But most importantly, the character of Samabandhu is presented in relation to Rebati, that he is a loving father and he loves to have his daughter by his side every evening when he sings himself various prayers, various bhajans, and he encourages his daughter to learn those bhajans and to sing for him in her sweet, melodious voice. And at the same time, he is also encouraging her to read. Therefore, he brought the book of fast lessons for her daughter to learn the alphabets. And this relationship between the father and daughter, which is appreciated by Rebati's mother, but which is not appreciated by the grandmother, is bringing in the initial complexity in the story, or we can say the conflict in the story. But this complexity is more intensified by the arrival of the school teacher, that is Basudev Mahapatra, a young graduate who himself was an orphan and who had been taken care of by his relatives, and who has now passed out from the teachers training school to be appointed by the government in this village as a primary school teacher. And immediately between the teacher and Shyamabandhu's family, there we find a very cordial relationship, as Shyamabandhu was appreciative of this teacher's attitude towards life, and Basudev was also very much in love with this family, because he had no one known in that village, and it was also by the effort of Shyamabandhu that the school was established and the teacher was being appointed. And this relationship between the two became beneficial for Rebati, whose ambition was to read. And The first day he got that book of fast lessons from her father, he was so excited, though he couldn't know exactly what is written there, but he was very much enamored by the pictures of animals, birds, fruits, and all those things. And he took that book to show to her grandmother, who immediately disliked and rejected these ideas. And we find in the story that the conversation between Samabandhu and his mother during the dinner, when Samabandhu asked his mother that he wanted to send Rebati for her education to Cuttack in a girls' school which was opened there. The mother immediately rejected these ideas by telling that girls should not be educated. It is a curse for the family, which was a conventional idea in those days. And Samabandhu liked to make her mother agree to his own vision of educating his daughter, as well as to bring the dream of Rebati to reality. And in spite of his mother's dislike, he decided to give formal education to his daughter through Basudev. So Basudev was appointed as the tutor, and the education began as in the Indian society on the day of Sri Panchami, or the day of the Saraswati Puja, by initiating her into the world of education. So for Rebati, this is the happiest time because her dream of being educated to read and to write, as well as at the same time the conversation between her father and the grandmother regarding the future relationship between Vasudev and her made her more excited. She felt excited, but at the same time, she was also very much sensible to follow the traditions of the village life in dealing with Vasudev. But this happiness on the part of the family could not continue for a long time. As we see, this story is probably the first story in India that records or that represents an epidemic. And in those days, in 19th century, particularly, the Indian village life was particularly affected by various epidemics. And one such epidemic was the cholera epidemic that came and visited this village, and in which one after another, Samabandhu and his wife, they perished. And this double tragedy brought a great misfortune not only for Rebati and her grandmother, but also for Basudev, the teacher. And he was the only person who stood beside them during this time, and he wanted to help them, but one after another the tragedy struck. After the death of Samabandhu, they had to sell their bullocks, and the cows were forcibly taken by the jamindar in the pretext of non-payment of certain tax, and the workers, they left. So immediately, within a small time, within no time, from a happy family, they became a family of the wretched sufferers. And for all this, the old mother of Shamabandhu, she cried, she blamed Rebati as the cause. But she had to take care of Rebati as well, who as a child was suffering the most, missing her parents, looking vacant in vacant eyes to the sky and remembering the song, the prayer taught by his father. Whither shall I take my prayers, Lord, if thou turnest a blind eye? Sure shall I be finished. So, this song, this prayer, it brings out the essence of this story that nobody, the God, did listen to Rebati's prayers. And ultimately, what happens after 6 months of her parents' death? Even Vasudev perished in cholera. And thereafter, it was the most miserable life for the old lady and the young daughter. And they even couldn't manage their food. And Rebati fell victim to the fever. And in the fever, she even lost her consciousness for some time. She became weak, and finally, when she got some strength to move around, the old lady goes to the village shop to collect some food by exchanging one of the old utensils. But unfortunately, she got very late. She returned by the evening, and by that time, Rebati had gone back to their backyard, and where she was looking at the stars in the sky, and she found as if her mother was inviting her to come with them. And the story ends with the death of Rebati and her grandmother as well. The story begins and ends with that famous wailing of the grandmother that Rebati, Rebi, you fire that turns all to ashes. So, this is the blame of Rebati's grandmother. But this is not simply a blame for the granddaughter, but this is also a very agonized wailing on the part of a woman, an old woman, who is finding one after another all her supporters of life are leaving her away. So she dies with this last wailing, and nobody has listened anything. The last words which has emanated from his house were, Rebati, Rebi, you fire that turns all to ashes. So this is a very poignant story about how that character of Rebati is making an effect on the mind of the reader. This story was translated into 36 languages, both in India and abroad. And the character Rebati, the name Rebati, has become an iconic figure to represent the emancipation of women through education. And this story is highlighting that how the conservative and superstitious grandmother, through her wailing, which has become immortalized in the history of Odia literature, which is very popular among the students who read these stories, that how this reads like a cautionary tale against allowing the female agency to be educated, lest it should spell doom and disaster. And on another level, it can be also viewed as it is a progressive story that exposes social stereotypes against women. So, a tale of empowerment and progressiveness. And Rebati's parents, particularly in this story, her father, is presented as a visionary who wanted, who saw that women through their education will come to enrich the society, to develop the society. And on the other hand, the grandmother was skeptical and totally against the idea. But the character of her mother is supportive, though she couldn't argue with her mother-in-law, but she provides the support to her husband's idea of educating Rebati as well as encouraging Rebati silently. So this story is a very powerful story by Fakir Mohan, who is a very good narrator by presenting the realistic narrative with a variety of humor, immediately captures the imagination of the reader and takes the reader into that reality as if the reader himself or herself experiences what the storyteller is narrating to them. And if we look at the story can be viewed as that a document of women empowerment. So the question can be asked from this story is that Fakir Mohan's Rebati is a literature of women empowerment through education discuss, or the question can be asked as analyze Fakir Mohan's Rebati as a critique of the traditional Odia village or rural life in 19th century. And here we can say that definitely Fakir Mohan is not openly professing any message of women empowerment. On the level, we cannot say exactly whether he is for women empowerment or he is against empowerment, but that is the strength of a great writer who serves the theme in an impartial manner, but in a very powerful manner, to make his readers see through what exactly the writer is pointing out. So this story is definitely a story that is favoring the idea of Rebati's education, and the concept of education is again and again hinted throughout the story when we find that in spite of his managing the family nicely and having a job where he can live very happily, but and being the only educated person in the village, Shyamabandhu wanted education as the means of bringing light to the village. So he is the harbinger of light of education to the village by requesting the officer, visiting officer, to provide a school and a teacher. And he is also the person who invited Basudev to his village, to his house, and he encouraged Basudev to teach his daughter. So here, Samabandhu is emerging as the agent of education, not only for the people in the village who were mostly illiterate at that time and who were happy by following their traditional village life, but at the same time he also wanted to break the taboo of female education by putting his own daughter through that ordeal. And in this manner we can say that definitely it is a document of women empowerment through education, and Basudev also plays a vital role in providing that encouragement to Rebati by teaching her the letters, teaching her to write, and the other Roman character of Rebati's mother is also a supporter of this idea. And it is nowhere mentioned in the story that though the grandmother was against Rebati going for education, but when Rebati was reciting those prayers in her melodious voice, that she was not approving it. She was rather enjoying that. So, in this way, we can say that definitely this is a document of women empowerment through education. And it is also a critique of the life of traditional Oriya rural life. That here in the story we find the contemporary feudal society, the grip of the feudal society on the people of the village, and how they were exploited by the Jamidar, and how even Jamidar exploited the family of Samabandhu after his death by demanding various papers in the pretext of taking something from him, and he took away the cows which were very lively, very source of life for them. So, and also towards the end of the story, we find when the old woman is going to the shopkeeper Hari for buttering that old utensil for some rice, how Hari is also exploiting. So, this story is also presenting the contemporary rural life where it was full of the system of exploitation by the feudal and the so-called uh, trading community, or the traders who wanted to also exploit the gullible villagers. So this is also a story of exploitation, superstition of the contemporary society. And from this story, another important question can be the title. The title Rebati. And you people must know that even in England, when the new novels were being written, the novels were written by the name of the female protagonist like Clarissa and others. So Rebati is probably following that tradition, consciously or unconsciously, by Fakir Mohan, that here Rebati is the spirit. And the story begins and ends with the curses or the wailings of the grandmother, but these wailings are also containing within them the spirit of Rebati, the spirit of revolt of Rebati against the conventional discrimination against the girl child. And the characters of Shamabandhu, Vasudeva, and the grandmother can be asked as few questions, which I think you can very well discuss in your answers. And finally, I would like to say that this is an iconic story which later on encouraged many women writers in Odisha as well as in different parts of India to write about various issues of women or the discrimination of women. I won't say that this is the story, because this story is written exactly 50 years after the establishment of school by Savitribai Phule in Maharashtra. So this story definitely had encouraged many writers to write about the women's empowerment, women empowerment in different aspects, because the story is presenting without any assertiveness, without any uh, single minded presentation of issues. The discrimination in a most acceptable manner. Story presents the contrast between Rebati and her grandmother, where Rebati is quite excited by overhearing his father talking to Basudev that she is going to be educated by telling that I am going to study, I am going to learn to read. But that is being contrasted with her grandmother's disapproval of Shyamabandhu's proposal by telling that what good will it do to you? How does book learning help a girl? It is enough to learn how to cook, bake, churn, butter, and decorate walls with rice paste. So, in this way, the story is presenting the hurdles before the education of the girl or the woman education in the contemporary period by treating education as a taboo, as if it will bring the divine wrath on everyone around it. And that is coming out very powerfully through the wailing, the famous wailing of the story that is mentioned at the beginning as well as the end of the story. And the story in this way is highlighting that how the issue of women education and at the same time the stereotypical gender roles that was being served through the speech of the grandmother, and in this way it is serving the document of women empowerment through education. And I hope that uh, you people will do justice by analyzing the predicament that Rebati faced in this story. I thank you for listening to me and hope that you will be doing justice to this story in your exams. Thank you.